My name is McKenna. I was 21 when all this happened, and I'd only been in Seattle for a month. I moved there because my girlfriend Stephanie landed a better job and we were done with the long-distance thing. We'd been doing video calls and visits for almost 2 years, and when she said, "If you really want to, we can finally live in the same place," I packed my shit and came. The apartment was small, older than it looked in photos, and the walls carried noise weirdly, but it was ours. The problem was that Stephanie worked long hours and came home drained most days, and I didn't know anyone besides her. I went from familiar streets and people who'd known me for years to a city where I felt like an extra in somebody else's life. I told myself I'd give it time, but after a few lonely evenings of scrolling my phone while the rain hit the windows, I realized I needed actual faces. The yoga class started as a practical idea. I was stiff from sitting around too much, and there was a studio a few blocks from our place that offered beginner classes after work. It felt safe enough. Bright room, decent lighting, instructor who looked like she'd been doing this since the 90s, a mix of people who kept to themselves. I went once, then again, and by the third class I recognized a couple of repeat faces. That was when Allison started talking to me. I'd seen her in class before, near the front, close to the windows. She always wore coordinated outfits, nothing flashy, but put together in a way that made it clear she thought about it. After one session, I was rolling up my mat when she walked over, carrying hers under one arm. "Hey," she said, friendly and direct. "You're new, right? I've seen you a couple times." She had that kind of voice that sits just below cheerful, not chirpy, but open. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun that somehow still looked intentional. Up close, she looked older than me by a few years, but not by a lot. She asked when I'd moved, where from, if I liked the city so far. When I told her I'd moved to live with my girlfriend and didn't really know anybody else yet, she smiled like she was genuinely happy for me and said, "That's cool. Big move though. I remember feeling pretty lost my first month here." We walked out together, talking about food places and weather and boring stuff like that, and she asked if I wanted to swap Instagrams, so we can send each other class times or whatever. It felt casual enough that I didn't hesitate. She typed her handle into my phone, followed me back within seconds, then said, "I'm Allison, by the way. I probably should have led with that." I laughed, told her my name, and that was that. She drifted out into the rain and I walked home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The first few times we hung out, it was normal. She texted me a couple days after we met, asking if I wanted to get coffee before class. We met at a small spot down the street from the studio. She was already there when I arrived, scrolling on her phone. She looked up as soon as I walked in, waved me over, and pointed at the drink in front of her. "I took a guess," she said, nodding at the iced chai waiting on the second napkin. "You give off iced chai energy." It was what I actually ordered most days. I laughed and told her that, and she looked pleased with herself in a quiet way that didn't feel showy. "Lucky guess," she said. We talked about nothing for a while. She asked how I was settling in, if I liked the neighborhood, how things were with Stephanie. When I mentioned Steph working a lot, she nodded like she already understood that rhythm. "Seattle's weird that way," she said. "People move here to chase something and then their whole life becomes their job. It's good you're trying to build your own stuff too." It felt nice to hear someone say that out loud. I didn't go into details about missing my dad, or how the move stirred a bunch of old grief up. It wasn't that kind of conversation. We agreed to meet before yoga again when our schedules lined up. When I got home, I told Steph about Allison in a short, casual way. "Met a girl at class," I said while we were making dinner. "She's cool." Steph said that was good, that she was glad I wasn't stuck in the apartment all day. It all seemed simple. It took me a little while to notice the copying. At first it was tiny stuff. The next time we got coffee, I wore a denim jacket over a hoodie because it was colder, and a week later, Allison showed up in almost the same combination, not identical, just close. She said, "You're right. Layers are the only way to survive this weather." Like we'd already had a conversation about it, but I couldn't remember if we had. She asked where I'd gotten my necklace, a simple cheap chain with a small charm my mom gave me after my dad died. When I told her it was just from a mall store back home, she said, "It suits you," and changed the subject. A few classes later, she wore a similar chain. Not the same charm, but the same length, the same color. She started using phrases I used. I say, "fair enough," a lot when I don't want to argue with someone, and one afternoon at coffee she said it 3 times in 10 minutes, in the same rhythm I do, but I figured it was coincidence until she picked up on some of my slang that I knew wasn't local. I'd say something, and the next time, it was in her mouth. It wasn't annoying yet, just strange, like hearing a recording of myself. The social media thing came a little after that. One night she replied to an old Instagram story I'd posted months before moving. A blurry photo of a highway out the passenger window with a caption about long drives that I'd forgotten was still up as a highlight. She wrote, "You drive like that a lot? Looks familiar." And then in person she said, "I saw that photo of you on the freeway. That stretch looks kind of like your road trip to see Stephanie last year, right?" I hadn't told her the details of that trip. The only way she'd know was if she'd scrolled through my old posts and pieced it together. That wasn't exactly weird in itself. People scroll. But she remembered small details from captions I barely thought about and brought them up like they were current. One evening after class, she said, "I like that band you posted the other day," naming a group I used to listen to with my dad when I was a kid, except I hadn't posted about them in years. I said, "Where'd you see that?" And she said, "Oh, you wrote about them in that birthday post for your dad a while back. I went through your old stuff when I couldn't sleep." Hope that's not creepy. She said it with a half laugh, like she was aware it might sound off, but wanted to frame it as harmless. I made a small noise and said it was fine. It didn't feel fine, but I didn't know her well enough yet to call it what it was. The first time she came over, it was technically my idea, but she nudged it there. I was heading home from work when she texted, "I'm near your area. You around?" I told her yeah, I'd just gotten in. She said, "I could swing by for a bit if you're not dead tired. Would be nice to see where you ended up living." I hesitated. I read it twice, thinking about how I barely let people into my space back home. Then I remembered I barely knew anyone here and didn't want to be that person who pushes everyone away, so I gave her the address. She showed up with a small bag of pastries and a look around the apartment that went beyond a casual glance. It was subtle, but I could feel her eyes tracking everything. The coat hooks by the door, the shelf with our photos, the way we stacked our shoes, the blankets on the couch. She complimented the place and said, "You guys made it really cozy," which is what everyone says about any apartment with a rug and a plant. We sat in the living room, and I made tea while she asked about how Steph liked her job, what my days looked like, whether I missed home. It felt ordinary on the surface. At one point, Stephanie called. She was on a late shift and wanted to let me know she might be later than planned. I stepped into the bedroom to answer, closing the door most of the way so Allison wouldn't have to listen to our relationship logistics. When I turned slightly, I saw the shadow of her feet in the hall, just beyond the crack. She wasn't walking past, they were still. I kept talking to Steph, but my awareness shifted. My girlfriend said something about maybe moving in a year or two if a promotion came through, and out of habit I said, "We'll figure it out when we get there." I heard the soft creak of a floorboard outside the door, like someone leaning. When I hung up and opened the door, Allison was in the hallway pretending to look at a framed photo. She turned when she saw me. "Sorry," she said quickly. "I thought you were done. I didn't want to interrupt. I just realized I hadn't really looked at your pictures." Her tone was light, but her face was too open, like she was waiting to see if I believed her. I said, "It's fine," because I didn't feel like asking, "Were you listening?" She stayed another half hour, then left with a hug that lasted a beat longer than I liked. Over the next few weeks, the mimicry got harder to ignore. She started showing up to class dressed more and more like me. Same leggings, same style of oversized sweatshirt, same brand of water bottle. Once she came in wearing an almost identical hoodie to one Steph had given me, just a different color. She commented on my hair one day. It looks good pulled half up like that. And the next week wore hers in the same way, with the same messy strands falling out around her face. She called it lazy hair day, even though I knew she'd styled it that way on purpose. During class, when the instructor gave a pose, I caught Allison watching me instead of the mirror, matching my timing and even my breathing. She started talking like me too, not copying my accent or anything, but picking up my patterns. I'd say, yeah, fair. And a few days later she'd say, yeah, fair, in the same tone, same little shrug. She began to mirror how I sat, how I leaned over my cup, how I crossed my arms when I was cold. One day, as I was telling a story, she finished my sentence, not in a playful way. She just stepped in and nailed the exact wording I would have used. Then she smiled like she'd proven something. The thing that really made my stomach twist came out of nowhere. We were walking out of the studio on a rainy Thursday, and she said, totally casually, "I get why you liked driving with your dad. There's something about long roads and loud music that makes shit feel easier, right?" I stopped walking. I hadn't told her that. I'd written something like it in my journal years ago, after he died in a car crash because some asshole ran a red light, and I'd posted a birthday tribute for him once, but it was vague. Miss you, and that kind of thing. Nothing about the specifics. The phrase she used was almost word for word from an entry I wrote on a night I couldn't sleep. Old grief rose so fast I felt hot. I said, "What did you say?" And she blinked, then shrugged. "Just guessing. You mentioned you used to drive with him. Sorry if that was too much." Her apology was immediate and soft, the kind meant to diffuse. I nodded slowly and kept walking, but the back of my neck buzzed. The journal lived in my nightstand, under a stack of random stuff. Old cords, a book I never finished, a couple of empty notebooks. I kept it there because I didn't like looking at it every day, but I also didn't want it buried in a box where I'd never see it again. I wrote in it less now, but it still held the worst parts of early grief. Guilt, anger, the ugly thoughts you don't say out loud. I checked that drawer the night after Allison made that comment, not sure exactly what I was looking for. The journal was there. I touched the cover just to make sure. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe I'd mentioned something to her at some point and forgotten trauma scrambles memory. That's real. She came over again the following week. This time, she was the one who pushed harder. She texted, "I'm nearby again. You busy?" I said I was tired. She responded, "Just for a bit. I brought that snack you said you missed from back home." When she showed up, she did in fact have the snack, same brand, same flavor. I hadn't even realized I'd said the name out loud. We sat on the couch, and she glanced down the hallway a few times like something was pulling her there. I stayed in the living room with her until she asked if she could use the bathroom. The bathroom was across from the bedroom. I heard the bathroom door open and close, then open again, then the faint creak of the bedroom door. By the time I stood up and walked toward the hall, she was stepping out of the bedroom, face neutral. "Your place is bigger than it looks," she said. "I almost went into your room instead of the bathroom. Sorry." The way she said it made it sound like she'd done exactly that. The journal was gone 2 days later. At first, I thought I'd moved it. I checked the nightstand drawer, then the shelf, then my bag, then under the bed. Then we went through the usual domestic routine of me asking Steph if she'd seen a black notebook thing, and her saying no. I emptied my backpack 3 times. The only person besides me and Stephanie who'd been in that room recently was Allison. The thought landed hard, but I didn't want to say it even in my own head. A day after I noticed it missing, Allison texted me late at night. "Do you ever feel like you should have done more that night?" I stared at the screen. There was no context. I wrote back, "What night?" She replied, "With your dad." Like if you'd called him, or if he'd stayed home, it wouldn't have happened. My chest tightened. I'd written almost that exact sentence in one of those early entries, the ones where logic didn't matter. I hadn't told anyone that, not even Steph. I called Allison instead of texting. She picked up on the second ring, sounding calm. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "I'm sorry," she said. "That probably came out wrong. I was just thinking about what you said, about him dying in a car crash, and how I'd probably blame myself if that were me. I didn't mean to upset you." Her explanation came too cleanly, too fast. If I hadn't recognized the language, I might have accepted it. We stayed on the phone a few more minutes, saying nothing important. She leaned hard into the caring friend role. When we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed and finally let myself think the thing I'd been avoiding. She had my journal. She didn't shove it in my face. She didn't quote whole passages or wave it around. If she had, I could have confronted her and drawn a clear line. Instead, she used it as a script. Over the next couple of weeks, she started mirroring parts of me I'd never let anyone see. The way I pulled at my fingers when I was anxious. The way I kept my voice steady when I wanted to cry. She switched her music taste overnight to bands I'd written about missing. She mentioned random small details from my childhood that I'd written down and never spoken out loud. Movies my dad liked. Stupid jokes he used to repeat. Each time she framed it as a guess or coincidence. My patience finally cracked when she showed up one evening dressed in a combination I knew she'd lifted from a journal entry. I'd written once about an outfit my dad complimented before one of my school events because it was the first time he'd called me grown up without sounding sad. Jeans, a simple dark top, hair half up with a cheap barrette. I hadn't worn that exact combination in years. When I opened the door, Allison was standing there in almost the same thing. She smiled like she was expecting me to be impressed. "You were right," she said. "This look is solid." "How would you know I was right?" I asked. My voice came out flatter than I intended. She blinked. "You said you liked this kind of thing." "I never told you I wore that to see my dad. I never described it." I watched her face carefully. There was a beat where something flickered in her eyes. Not guilt exactly. More like annoyance at being caught. Then she smoothed it over. "Okay, maybe I scrolled more than you realized. You post stuff. It's not like it's locked in a vault." She shrugged, making it sound like I was overreacting, except I knew which details were public and which weren't. The journal-shaped hole in my nightstand drawer felt bigger than ever. I pulled back after that. I started making excuses, skipping yoga, claiming I was working late even when I wasn't, saying Steph and I had plans when all we were doing was eating dinner and watching something dumb. Allison's messages shifted from friendly to hurt to quietly pissed. "You've been different lately. I thought we were close. You don't have to pretend like we're not the same in a lot of ways." That last one got under my skin. I thought about the way she talked now, how much of my rhythm had slipped into her sentences, the way she had picked up my posture, and I thought about the journal filled with my worst moments, and how she'd probably read it cover to cover. Around the same time, Stephanie's job situation changed. The promotion she'd mentioned months ago actually came through, but it was in another state. It wasn't a surprise. We'd known it was on the table. What changed was how fast it was happening. She came home one evening, dropped her bag, and said, "So, they want me in Portland by the end of the year." We had 3 months, maybe less, to figure everything out. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a stressful but exciting decision. With Allison circling my life like a ghost wearing my face, it felt like a lifeline. I told Steph about Allison in pieces. I didn't say, "She stole my journal and is trying to become me." I said, "She's been weird," and described the copying in practical terms, the matching clothes, the conversations she shouldn't remember, the way she'd shown up in an outfit tied to a private memory. Steph listened, jaw clenched. She didn't call me dramatic. She didn't tell me it was all in my head. She just said, "I don't like that," and "Maybe it's good we're leaving sooner than later." That was the first time I felt genuinely grateful for corporate bullshit. The last time I saw Allison before we left, she didn't speak to me. I was walking back from the store with a bag of groceries, mind already spinning through packing lists, change of address forms, all the mundane crap that goes with moving. It was late afternoon, that weird gray light Seattle does so well. As I came up to the corner near our building, I saw her across the street. For a second, I thought I was looking at a reflection. Same jacket, same jeans, same kind of bag, worn on the same shoulder. Her hair was styled like mine, down to the way I clip back one side when it's bothering me. She was standing still, hands in her pockets, staring at our building. When her eyes met mine, there was no surprise in them. It was like she'd already rehearsed this moment too. We didn't wave. We didn't walk toward each other. We just stood there looking at each other. I felt something cold crawl up my spine, not because I thought she was going to run at me or scream, but because of how calm she looked, like she'd accepted something I couldn't see. After a few seconds, I did the only thing I could think of that didn't involve losing my shit on the sidewalk. I broke eye contact, stepped off the curb, and walked past her without changing my pace, but I could feel her watching me all the way to the door. I told Steph about it that night. She asked if I wanted to report anything, talk to the studio, block Allison on everything. I said I'd already blocked her, and I didn't know what I'd even tell the police. She dresses like me and reads too much into my posts, isn't exactly actionable. We decided to focus on packing. We left Seattle 3 weeks later. The move was rushed in a way that didn't leave room for second guessing. Boxes, goodbyes, last looks at streets I'd barely learned. I checked the yoga studio schedule once out of morbid curiosity and saw Allison still signed up for classes. I didn't go back to say goodbye. I didn't want a clean ending with her. I just wanted out. I still think about the journal. I never got it back. Maybe it's still in some drawer at her place or underneath a bed or tucked in a bag. Sometimes I imagine her reading it again, like a script she's trying to memorize. I hate that she has that part of me. I hate that I didn't lock it up better. Mostly I hate that when I picture her now, I don't see the Allison I met that first night, the friendly girl at yoga who seemed genuinely happy I'd found someone to live with. I see the version on the sidewalk, dressed in my clothes, carrying herself like she'd practiced my walk in a mirror, staring at the building I was about to leave. I'm in a different city now. Stephanie's job is demanding but stable, and we don't talk about Seattle much. I have new routines, new grocery stores, new streets where nobody knows my name. I'm more careful about what I post. I still write sometimes, but I don't keep it all in one place anymore, and I don't leave my private shit anywhere someone can quietly pick it up and study it. Every once in a while, I'll catch my reflection in a shop window and for half a second, feel that old unease. Like I'm going to blink and see someone else standing there copying my stance. I shake it off and keep moving. There's no sign of Allison here, no reason to think she followed me. Logically, it ended when I put distance between us. But there's a part of me that keeps expecting to scroll past a photo one day and see my own clothes, my own words, my own haircut on someone else's face again, and know it's her. And I know that if that happens, there won't be anything I can really do about it except close the app, put the phone down, and remind myself that no matter how hard she tried, she never actually became me. She just got stuck in the version of me she pieced together from whatever she could grab. The rest she doesn't get to have. I've known Matthew most of my life. We grew up on the same dead-end street, the kind where everyone left their doors unlocked and the kids moved in and out of each other's houses without knocking. From second grade onward, we were inseparable. We spent afternoons playing Halo on an old TV in my basement, dug through stacks of comics on the floor of his room, rode our bikes everywhere until the daylight ran out, and wasted entire weekends fishing behind the park at a spot only we thought was secret. In high school, we joined the same rec basketball league, hung around the same group, got in trouble for the same dumb things. People joked that if you saw one of us, the other was somewhere nearby. It wasn't that we were alike, we weren't, but we fit together in a way that made everything feel easy. During senior year, Matthew started talking about joining the military. He brought it up casually, as if he'd just thought of it. I didn't take it seriously until one afternoon when he said he'd already talked to a recruiter and signed paperwork. He told me he wanted to get out of town, see something new, do something that actually mattered. His dad had been in the service years before, though he never talked much about it, and I figured that was part of what pushed him. I remember asking him if he was nervous, and he shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. 4 years, he said. People do it all the time. I didn't know what to say to that. We graduated, and a few months later he left for basic training. We stayed in touch for a while after he left. Quick texts, occasional late-night calls when the time zones lined up. He sent pictures of wherever he was stationed and random comments about the food, the heat, or how tired he was. Then the messages slowed down, little by little, until they were months apart. It wasn't a fight or a falling out. Life just spread us in different directions. I figured when he finally came back, we'd find our rhythm again. Childhood friends always talk, like that's how it works. The first sign he was home came from a vague Facebook post. Someone shared that he'd landed stateside, no details, no mention of when he'd be in town. I didn't want to crowd him, but after thinking about it, I drove to the airport just to say welcome back. The arrivals area was busy, families hugging, people shouting names, luggage rolling everywhere. I scanned the crowd until I finally spotted him near one of the concrete pillars by the sliding doors. He looked mostly like himself, but thinner, and his hair was clipped shorter than he ever wore it before. His posture was stiff, shoulders tight. When he saw me, he gave a small nod and said, "Hey," like we'd run into each other at a store. I asked about his flight, if he was tired, if he wanted to grab something to eat, and he brushed each question off with a short answer. He kept glancing around, not frantically, just small habitual checks, like he couldn't stop tracking movement in the room. When I offered him a ride home, he shook his head. "Taxi's coming," he said. I told him it was good to see him. He said, "Yeah," quietly. When the taxi pulled up, he climbed inside without another word. I stood there for a second after the car pulled away, not sure what to make of any of it. 3 days passed before I saw him again. He texted me his sister's address, no explanation, and asked me to come by. When I parked outside, I heard muffled voices from inside the house, tense but unclear. Before I knocked, the door opened and Matthew came out quickly. He didn't look angry, just exhausted. He said "hey" in a flat tone and got into my car. I tried to make conversation, asked if he was sleeping any better or settling in okay. But he answered in clipped, quiet phrases, or didn't answer at all. His eyes stayed fixed on the window during the drive. We went to my place. I grabbed 2 beers, more out of habit than anything. He held his, but barely touched it. I put on Halo, the game we'd played more than anything else growing up, and he picked up the controller. Right away, something felt off. He held it too tightly, hands tense. He sat straight-backed, not relaxing into the couch. He looked thinner up close, and the bags under his eyes were deeper than they'd been at the airport when the game got loud. Grenade blasts, chaotic firefights. He didn't jump or react, but he froze mid-movement, controller suspended for a second before he resumed. He mumbled under his breath a few times, broken, low sounds I couldn't understand. At one point, he lifted his beer halfway to his mouth, stopped mid-motion, and set it down again without drinking. He barely talked. I'd ask about a map we used to mess around on, and he'd say, "Don't remember," after a long pause. I'd mention something dumb we did in high school, and he wouldn't respond at all. He didn't seem fully in the room. Halfway through a match, he stood up abruptly and said he needed to go. I drove him back to his sister's house, where he got out quickly with a quiet, "Thanks." I watched him walk inside, and then drove home wondering if I'd done something wrong or if the years apart had built a wall we couldn't cross. A week went by with no word from him. I sent a couple messages, nothing heavy, just checking if he was okay, but they went unanswered. After that, I stopped reaching out. I figured he needed time. I didn't want to push him farther away. Most nights I'd come home from work, sit on my couch, and think about the version of him who used to stay over until 2 a.m., trash talking and laughing at the TV until my mom yelled at us to turn it down. That version didn't match the guy who sat in my living room frozen in place. One night after work, I logged onto Facebook without any real intention. When I saw he'd been active, I clicked his profile. What I saw hit me hard enough that my stomach dropped. He'd posted photos over the past few days, pictures of rifles, ammunition, tactical gear. In one, he was standing in a dim hallway, holding a rifle across his chest, expression blank. In another, the rifle was laid out neatly on a table next to boxes of rounds. Underneath the images were vague captions. Prepared. Some things don't get forgiven. Stay ready. Then there were text posts, short, angry lines like, "You don't let the enemy walk free," and "They think they can hide." Nothing specific, nothing naming anyone, but enough to make the meaning unmistakable. I closed my laptop and sat there with my hands pressed against my face. I didn't want to call the police. The thought of something happening to him made my chest tighten, but doing nothing felt impossible. I kept imagining him walking into the wrong place at the wrong time, or getting hurt by someone who didn't understand he wasn't thinking clearly. Eventually, I grabbed my keys and left. I didn't know what I planned to do. I just knew I needed to see him. The house was quiet when I got there. I knocked a few times. No answer. I tried the doorknob and it opened. Inside, the living room was cluttered. Nothing destroyed, just signs of people too stressed to clean a blanket on the floor. A mug tipped over, mail scattered. I called out for Matthew, but the house swallowed the sound. Then a door opened down the hall, and his sister stepped out. Her eyes were red. She'd clearly been crying. She told me they'd fought earlier. She didn't have the energy for details, just said he'd been yelling, saying things she didn't want to repeat. She said he hadn't been sleeping, barely ate, spent hours locked in his room watching old movies and documentaries. She tried suggesting therapy, but he'd shut her down every time. "He keeps saying nobody can help," she said. "I don't know what to do anymore." She looked at me like maybe I might have some answer she hadn't tried. I went to his room and knocked. No response. Knocked again. "Matt," I said, "it's me." "Go away," he said from behind the door, voice tight. "I just want to talk," I said. "Please come out." Nothing. I looked at his sister. "Do you have a key?" She got one from a drawer, hands shaking. I unlocked the door slowly and pushed it open. The room was dim, blinds shut tight. A small lamp was the only light. Matthew sat on his bed wearing his old uniform shirt and pants, rumpled and unbuttoned at the collar. He was loading rounds into a magazine with stiff, uneven movements. The air smelled like sweat and stale clothes. When I stepped inside, he didn't look up. He muttered something under his breath, low, unintelligible. "Matthew," I said carefully. "What are you doing?" He slid another round into the magazine. "I have to be ready," he said quietly. He set the loaded magazine down and stood up too fast, catching himself on the edge of the bed. "They don't get to walk away." "Who?" I asked. He shook his head. "You weren't there," he said. "You don't get it." I stepped closer. "Then tell me. Help me understand." He moved abruptly toward the door, and I reflexively reached out. He shoved me back, not hard enough to knock me over, but enough to make the point. When I looked up, he had the rifle raised slightly, not aimed, but not lowered either. "Don't," he said, voice shaking. "Stay back. Don't make me do something I don't want to do." His sister made a sound behind me, half gasp, half sob. "Okay," I said quietly. "I'm not moving." He looked between us, jaw tight, eyes darting. "I have to finish this," he said. "Nobody else will." He backed into the hallway, then toward the front door. By the time we reached the doorway, he was already outside. He grabbed his sister's keys from the hook, got into her car, and drove off too fast. His sister called the police, voice trembling as she explained he'd left with her rifle, that he'd been acting unstable, that she was scared he'd hurt someone. I stood beside her while she spoke, listening to her voice crack as she said his name. Officers arrived quickly, took statements, then left to search the surrounding area. I took his sister with me, and we drove around town, checking places he might go. Old hangouts, familiar roads. We saw a couple police cars with their lights off cruising slowly, but no sign of the car. After a while, she told me she couldn't do it anymore that night. I drove her home, then went back to my place and sat on my couch, staring into the dark, replaying the look in Matthew's eyes in that dim room. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Matthew standing in that dim room, his uniform wrinkled, hands shaking around the rifle. I kept checking my phone for updates, even though I knew nothing would come in the middle of the night. When it finally rang the next morning, I answered before it even buzzed a second time. It was his sister. She sounded worn down but calmer than the night before. She said the police found Matthew early that morning, still driving her car on a highway outside town. There was no chase, no chaos. They pulled him over and he stepped out without arguing. She said the officers told her he looked exhausted, like he was barely conscious, and that he kept saying he needed to finish something but couldn't explain what. They confiscated the rifle and everything else he had with him. She said they'd taken him somewhere for an evaluation, a facility that handled veterans who needed crisis intervention. She didn't know how long he'd be there. The only thing she kept repeating was, "He didn't hurt anyone. Thank God he didn't hurt anyone." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Relief hit me, but there was heaviness behind it. I thanked her for letting me know and hung up, then sat on the edge of my bed staring at the wall. The quiet in my apartment felt wrong, like the silence itself was watching me. I'd spent half the night expecting a knock on the door or a call with the worst possible news. Now all I could feel was a dull ache somewhere behind my ribs. The next few days moved strangely. I went to work, helped customers, stocked shelves, tried to keep my mind on normal things. But every time my thoughts drifted, they drifted to Matthew, loading that magazine, mumbling under his breath, the blank look he gave me before he told me to stay back. I'd never seen fear and determination mixed like that in anyone's face. It scared me more in hindsight than it did in the moment. A few evenings later, his sister called again. Her voice sounded tired in a deeper way, like she'd been speaking through tears for too long and was now running on empty. She said she'd talked with the people at the facility. Matthew was safe, but he wasn't doing well emotionally. They told her he'd been struggling for a long time. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. During his deployment, Matthew had grown close to another soldier, a guy around our age. They were assigned together often, worked in the same small unit, and Matthew had mentioned him a few times in letters early on. She told me that Matthew never said what happened directly, but the therapists said his friend died in a bombing. Matthew saw it up close. A few others were injured badly. It wasn't the kind of thing anyone walked away from unaffected. She didn't go into detail, and I didn't ask for more. She said Matthew stopped talking about it shortly after it happened, barely mentioned it in letters or calls. When he came home, he shoved it down or maybe convinced himself he didn't need help. She said the facility staff believed he'd been carrying the trauma for years without processing any of it, and the result was what she'd been living with. The isolation, the paranoia, the anger that flared out of nowhere, the nights without sleep, the belief that the enemy was still out there somewhere waiting for him. We talked for a few minutes. She apologized for dragging me into all of it. I told her not to. I told her I was glad he was alive and getting help. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long while without doing anything, just thinking about how many pieces there were to the story that I never saw. It made sense now, but it didn't make it easier. Days passed without much change. I didn't go back to his sister's house. I didn't check his Facebook again. It felt pointless to scroll through posts that weren't going to change. I kept going to work, eating when I remembered, doing what I needed to do. Sometimes after work, I'd stand in my living room staring at the Halo case on the shelf, thinking about the nights we used to play until his parents called him home, or how he'd fall asleep on my floor still holding the controller. I wondered if that version of him was gone for good, or if it was still somewhere under everything that had slowly broken him down. Eventually, his sister updated me again. Matthew had been formally admitted for long-term treatment. They said it would take time, not days or weeks, but months, maybe more. He wasn't stable enough for visitors yet. She didn't know when that would change. She sounded steadier, like she had finally accepted that someone else was handling the situation and that she didn't have to carry it alone. After I hung up the phone that day, I didn't feel much of anything, just a quiet weight inside me. I went for a walk around my block even though the sun was already going down. It was cold out, but it felt better to move than sit alone in the silence of my apartment. I thought about Matthew during that walk, not the Matthew in the uniform loading a rifle or the Matthew who shoved me across the room, but the kid who used to knock on my door every morning in the summer with his bike helmet crooked on his head, asking if I was finally ready to go ride. I held on to that version for the whole walk, even though I knew that person wasn't coming back anytime soon. I still don't know when he'll get better, or if better will ever mean what it used to. He's alive, he's safe, and he's finally somewhere that can help him carry the weight he's been dragging for years. That's what matters. I don't know when I'll hear his voice again, and I'm not waiting by the phone. But if his sister ever calls and says he's ready to talk, I'll answer. Maybe someday he'll find his way back to something close to himself. For now, I take each day as it comes and hope that wherever he is, he's finally finding some kind of rest. And if that's all the closure I ever get, then that's enough. I met Elise through our mutual friend Teresa about 6 months ago. The three of us hung out maybe twice before Teresa got busy with work and drifted away, but Elise and I kept hanging out. It wasn't really planned. She'd text me to see what I was doing, I'd say nothing, and next thing I knew we were at the mall or sitting on my couch with some random show playing in the background. Elise was easy to be around in the beginning. She wasn't loud or dramatic. She was just friendly in a steady way. If we said we'd meet at 3, she'd be there at 3. If I mentioned I was having a bad day, she'd show up with snacks and a movie without making a big deal about it. We ended up spending most days together, walking around the mall with no real plan, grabbing pastries at the same bakery over and over, driving out to the beach for an hour just to sit in the car and listen to music. I had other friends, but Elise quietly became the person I saw the most. Around the 6-month mark, I started seeing a guy named Adrian. It was casual at first, coffee, a few dinners, some late nights talking, but it got more serious pretty fast. Elise and I were still close, just not attached at the hip the way we had been. Some nights I was with her, some nights I was with him. It felt like a normal shift. When Adrian came over to my place and Elise happened to be there, she'd make little comments. Stuff like, "You two act like you're in a movie," or, "Do you guys ever stop holding hands?" She said it with an eye roll and a half smile, so I took it as harmless teasing. I figured she was a little jealous because she was single and now had to share her time with someone, but that was about it. The first time anything actually felt off was one evening when I was getting ready to go out with Adrian. I was in the bathroom, halfway through my makeup, when the doorbell rang and I thought he'd shown up early. When I opened the door, it was Elise. She was holding a bag of snacks and one of the old movies we used to rewatch together. "Oh," she said. "I thought we could watch this tonight." "I actually have a date with Adrian," I said. Her face dropped. "Oh, I didn't know." There was a pause. "Are you sure you can't tell him to take a rain check? You two just went bowling yesterday. Wouldn't you rather have a girls' night with me?" "We already made plans this weekend," I told her. She adjusted the snacks under her arm and took a small step toward the doorway like she expected me to move. "Come on, just this once. We haven't hung out much this week. I was kind of looking forward to tonight. I can sit on the couch while you finish getting ready. We can start the movie and you can leave halfway if you want." I put my hand on the door frame so she couldn't slip past. "Elise, I'm going out with Adrian." She looked at me for a long second. But we haven't watched this together in months, she said, lifting the case slightly. I thought tonight could be our night. You can text him and say you'll meet him later. I'm not blowing off plans, I said, firmer. We can watch it tomorrow. She was quiet, then repeated, tomorrow? Like she needed to lock it in. Yes, tomorrow. She nodded slowly. Okay, tomorrow. Her voice sounded flat, not angry, just let down. She told me to have fun and walked back to her car. I closed the door and went back to my makeup, but the conversation replayed in my head more than it should have. It was the first time I felt like she wasn't just disappointed. I felt like she expected me to pick her over him. We did end up watching the movie the next day like I promised. She showed up, tossed the snacks on the coffee table, and acted like everything was normal. Still, little things started stacking up after that. If I mentioned I was going to see Adrian, she'd say, again? Or, damn, you practically live with him now, even though that wasn't true. If I canceled on her once because Adrian and I hadn't seen each other in a few days, she'd bring it up later. One Friday, I had plans with Adrian, but he texted me an hour before to say he had to stay late at work. I told Elise about it when she asked what I was doing that night. Wow, she said. So he bailed on you again? It's just work, I said. It happens. We could have planned something, she replied. If I'd known you were going to be sitting at home, I would have come over, or you could have just asked me instead of waiting on him. I did invite her that night to come over and watch something, mostly because I felt bad, and she showed up almost immediately, like she'd been waiting for that exact opening. She seemed too happy that Adrian had to cancel. Another night, when Adrian was actually there, she wedged herself between us on the couch when I came back from the kitchen. I had been sitting next to him when I walked in. She was in my spot. Oh, sorry, she said, glancing at me but not moving. I was cold, so I came over here. You don't mind, right? I ended up sitting on the other side of her. The whole time Adrian and I talked, she kept inserting herself into the conversation, talking over him, answering questions meant for me. It wasn't loud or obvious enough to start a fight, but it was constant. Small things like that started piling up. Nothing extreme on its own, just enough to put a knot in my stomach. The night everything really shifted was when Adrian came over to play Monopoly. Elise was there too, sitting on the armchair with her phone while he and I set up the board at the coffee table. Adrian had brought his Bluetooth speaker because he liked playing music in the background. He put on a country playlist and set the speaker on the floor. At first, Elise didn't say anything, but I could see her expression tighten every time a song changed. Eventually, she got up. Can you lower that? She asked. No, Adrian said. If it bugs you, you can use earphones or go in the other room. She stared at him. Can you just turn it down a little? No, he repeated. I'm listening to it. Her jaw clenched. Instead of walking away, she walked over to the speaker, turned it off, picked it up, and threw it on the ground. The battery cover popped off and rolled under the table. What the hell is your problem? Adrian snapped, standing up. I can't listen to that garbage, she said. Why can't you put on something normal? We always listen to pop. That's not your choice, he said. You don't touch my stuff. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, staring at the broken-apart speaker on the floor. Elise rolled her eyes. Maybe if you weren't being so stubborn, I wouldn't have to do that. You're out of line, Adrian said. He grabbed his speaker pieces, shoved them in his bag, and turned to me. I'll text you later. He left without saying anything else to her. The second the door closed, Elise muttered, "Drama queen," under her breath. What was that? I asked. She looked at me like she was confused. What? Throwing his speaker? What was that, dude? She shrugged. I wanted him gone. I thought we could have a girls' night. Just us, like before he showed up all the time. That doesn't mean you get to break his stuff. It's not broken, she said. It's fine. He's overreacting. I was tired and annoyed. Whatever. I'm not in the mood for this. I'm going to bed. You can leave whenever. She didn't like that, but she didn't argue. She left a few minutes later. After that, I texted Adrian to apologize again about the speaker. He said the speaker itself didn't matter, but he was fed up with how Elise treated him. I told him maybe she'd had a rough day and just didn't want music on, but even while I said it, I knew that wasn't the truth. She just didn't want him there. From there, everything with her ramped up. Adrian had just started a full-time warehouse job, so his schedule got heavier. We didn't see each other as often, which should have meant I had more open time. But it felt like Elise took that as permission to attach herself even more. She started showing up unannounced. Sometimes I'd come home from work and find her sitting on my front step. Other times she'd knock while I was in the shower. If I didn't answer my phone fast enough, she'd call again, and again, and again. If I left my phone in another room for an hour, I'd come back to 10 missed calls and a string of messages like, "Where are you? Are you mad at me? Why aren't you answering? Hello? Seriously, what's going on?" When I told her she was being too much, she always went back to the same lines. "I just want to spend more time with you. We're best friends. You're the only person I have. Don't you like how close we've gotten?" She started popping up in places that didn't feel like coincidence anymore. At the grocery store when I hadn't mentioned I was going, at the coffee shop when I'd gone there last minute, once even outside my work when I got off early, she'd act surprised each time. "Oh, funny running into you," she'd say. It stopped feeling funny. I thought about taking a short weekend trip with a couple of my other friends just to get space and clear my head, but I knew she'd notice the second I started planning something. She paid too much attention to everything I did. The breaking point came on a day when Adrian finally had an actual day off. We hadn't had a proper date in about a week, so we kept it simple. We went to see a movie, grabbed food afterward, and walked around a park until the sun started going down. It was the first time in a while where I felt like I could just relax. When he dropped me off, we kissed and he drove home. I walked inside, locked the door, and checked my phone. 10 missed calls, around 20 messages, all from Elise. I had silenced my phone earlier because I wanted one day that wasn't interrupted by her. I was scrolling through the notifications, trying to decide whether to call her back or wait, when my phone lit up again. This time it was Adrian. When I answered, I could hear the panic in his voice. He told me Elise had come by his place while we were out. She'd been banging on his door, yelling at him. When he finally opened it, she threatened him, told him he needed to break up with me, that I belonged with her, and that she'd make trouble for him if he didn't. She'd brought up things she shouldn't have known about his family and his job, and she wouldn't calm down. He almost called the cops while she was there, but she left before they arrived. Then he told me she'd left a voicemail earlier that day, saying she'd do something he wouldn't like if she caught us together again. He hadn't taken it seriously at the time, but now he was freaked out. He said he was calling the police for sure this time. I told him to stay inside and not answer the door for anyone. My hands were shaking when I hung up. I knew she'd gotten possessive, but hearing that she'd gone to his house and screamed at him like that, it felt like something snapped. Before I could really process it, I heard a knock at my own front door. Then her voice, calling my name, trying the handle. I froze. The knock came again. Harder. I didn't answer. She kept going. The knocking turned into full-on pounding that rattled the door. She started yelling my name now, telling me to open up, saying we needed to talk. I grabbed my phone, ran into my bedroom, and shut myself in the closet. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it trying to dial 911. I told the operator my friend was trying to get into my house, that she'd just gone after my boyfriend, that I felt unsafe. I stayed on the line while the pounding continued, my heart thudding in my ears. After what felt like forever, I heard sirens outside. The pounding stopped. A few minutes later, someone knocked more calmly and identified themselves as police. I cracked the closet door, then the bedroom door, then went to the front. An officer told me it was safe. They had her in custody. She'd been picked up outside not far from my place. They asked me questions. How long I'd known her, what had happened between us, what she'd been doing lately. It all sounded worse when I said it out loud. The constant calls, the unannounced visits, the way she inserted herself into my relationship, the threats to Adrian. Elise was arrested for harassment and trespassing, and Adrian reported her for coming to his place and threatening him. There was more than enough on record now between the calls, the voicemail, and our statements. I watched from the window as they put her in the back of the squad car. She didn't look up at my apartment. She just stared straight ahead. That was the last time I saw her. In the weeks after, I blocked her number, deleted our old chats, and removed her from every piece of social media. Adrian and I tried to keep things going for a while, but between his job, the stress, and everything that had happened, we ended up breaking up not long after. It wasn't a dramatic thing. It just felt like we were both too tired to carry all of it. I moved out of state a few months later. New apartment, new job, new people. I've made some friends since then, but my circle is small and it stays that way. I don't hand over all my time to anyone anymore. I pay attention to how people react when I say no, when I say I'm busy, when I say I need space. You don't really know how someone handles boundaries until you put one up and watch what they do with it. When I was 25, I picked up a full-time job at a gas station about 8 minutes from my apartment. It wasn't the kind of place anyone dreamed of working, but it fit around my night classes and the routine made sense for where I was in life. Stock the coolers, ring people up, restock whatever customers tore through, and try not to fall asleep during the slow hours. Nothing exciting ever really happened there. By the time my last year rolled around, a new guy named Dustin got hired. He was in his early 30s, a little awkward at first, but polite and easy enough to work with once he relaxed. I trained him on his first shift, showed him how the register worked, how to reset the pumps when they glitched, all the usual stuff. We ended up talking more as the shift went on, and it turned out we got along well, not instantly close or anything, just comfortable. After a couple more shared shifts, we started chatting during slow hours and became friends without really planning to. I didn't think much of it at the time. It felt normal, simple, just another coworker I clicked with a little more than the rest. A couple weeks later, I came in for a morning shift wearing a little makeup. Nothing heavy, just mascara, a bit of eyeliner, and a soft lip tint. It wasn't even intentional. I'd been getting ready for class and didn't feel like wiping it off. For a gas station shift, it was more effort than usual. Dustin was in the snack aisle stocking chips when I walked in. He glanced up, froze for a beat, then smiled a little too brightly. "Hey, Kara. You look really nice today. Pretty." It caught me off guard, but the comment itself wasn't uncomfortable. I thanked him, clocked in, and started going through the opening routine. But as the morning picked up, I kept catching these small moments that didn't sit right. Whenever I moved through the aisles or bent down to restock the coolers, I'd feel eyes on me. Not strong enough to make a scene, but noticeable. The kind of stare you don't see directly. You sense it first. At one point, I was wiping down the coffee counter, and without lifting my head, I saw him in the reflection of the metal dispenser. He was pretending to rearrange the gum display, but he wasn't looking at the gum. Another time, I was restocking bottled water in the coolers. I stood up and felt that prickle on the back of my neck. I glanced sideways, just enough to use my peripheral vision. He was half-turned in my direction, holding a box of inventory he clearly wasn't using, eyes fixed on me. Every time I shifted or lifted my head, he snapped back to whatever task was in front of him, almost too quickly. The whole thing was subtle enough that I kept trying to tell myself I was overthinking it. During our break, we ended up in the break room together. I sat at the table scrolling through my phone, and he sat across from me peeling the label off a water bottle. For a few minutes, it was quiet in that normal, tired coworker way. Then he asked, "Are you single?" I looked up, caught off guard. Yeah. Why?" He didn't look embarrassed, just curious. "Do you think it'd be weird to date someone you work with?" The question was so abrupt, it almost sounded like he was testing the waters more than actually asking. His tone wasn't heavy or serious, so I treated it like a throwaway comment. "I mean, probably," I said. "Stuff like that usually gets awkward." He nodded and let it drop. No follow-up, no reaction, just quiet again. The rest of the shift wasn't uncomfortable, but I felt myself paying more attention to where he was, how close he stood, and whether he was watching again. Nothing obvious happened after break, but those glances from earlier replayed in my head all the way home. Later that evening, after feeding my dog and settling on the couch, I finally checked my phone. There was a message from Dustin sent less than 15 minutes after our shift ended. "Dustin, I think we should date and be more than friends. We'd make a good couple." I stared at it for a moment, trying to figure out how to respond without making anything worse than it already felt. I typed the safest thing I could think of. "Me. Sorry, Dustin, I'm not really looking to date at the moment." He replied almost instantly. "Dustin, I really like you a lot." "Dustin, I hope you change your mind." I didn't answer. I just ignored the messages, turned my phone off, and ordered takeout. I tried to tell myself he was probably being impulsive, maybe misreading things, maybe playing around. But the way he'd been looking at me all day didn't really support that theory. And even though I tried to brush it off, something about the whole situation stayed in the back of my mind long after the movie I put on had ended. The next day, I came into work for an afternoon shift. When I walked into the break room to set my bag down, I stopped short. A bouquet of roses sat in the center of the table, big, bright red ones wrapped in clear plastic. A small folded note with my name on it was taped to the front. I picked them up slowly, confused for a moment, but the more I thought about it, the fewer possibilities there were. After yesterday, it wasn't hard to put two and two together. The break room door opened behind me. I turned around and saw Dustin standing there holding a mug of coffee. As soon as he saw the flowers in my hands, he smiled. "Oh, good. You found them," he said. "I wanted to surprise you." There wasn't much I could do in that moment except thank him. I didn't really want to accept them, but with him standing a few feet away, watching my reaction, I felt cornered. I set the bouquet down by my bag and headed out front. The shift dragged after that. Dustin hovered more than usual, and he already hovered a lot. When I walked behind the counter to restock cigarettes, he stepped past me close enough that his shoulder brushed mine. When I was organizing the impulse buy racks near the register, he placed his hand lightly on my upper back while asking some throwaway question about inventory. It stayed there a second or two longer than it needed to before he let it drop. Every time I moved to another part of the store, I'd hear him fall into step nearby. If I stopped to straighten something, he'd find something to fix beside me. If I stepped away to help customers at the pumps, he drifted out behind me under the excuse of checking the windshield fluid buckets. Individually, none of it was extreme, but in a steady stream, it felt like he was always a half step behind me, always right there. At one point, when the store was finally quiet, I pulled my manager aside and told him Dustin had brought me flowers, kept getting too close, and that it was making me uncomfortable, and I asked if I could switch shifts. He didn't dismiss me, but he didn't act like he knew what to do with it either. "I'll keep an eye on him," he said. "If anything escalates, we'll figure it out." I nodded, even though the answer didn't actually make me feel better. At the end of my shift, I went home exhausted. I reheated leftovers, put on Jeopardy, and sat on the couch with my dog curled up beside me. The house was quiet. For a little while, it felt normal again. Then someone knocked on the door. My dog jumped up barking. I muted the TV and checked the peephole. Dustin was standing on my porch. My stomach flipped. I opened the door just enough to block most of the doorway. "Dustin, what are you doing here?" He stood with his hands in his pockets, rocking slightly on his heels. "Hey, can I come in?" "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "I'm kind of in the middle of something. I just want to talk, Kara." "Dustin, I really think you should go." I started to close the door, expecting him to turn away. Instead, he stepped in closer to the frame, narrowing the gap I was trying to create. I froze for a moment, unsure of what he was going to say. "Kara," he said quietly, but with this strange intensity behind it. "I love you. I've felt it for a while now. I know you feel something too." My heart pounded in my chest. "Dustin, I don't. I don't feel that way. I only see you as a friend." He shook his head noticeably, almost like he was trying to clear water out of his ears. No, you do. You have to. I can tell." Then he suddenly dropped to his knees on my doorstep. "Kara, please," he said, looking up at me. "Please, I'm begging you. Just give me a chance." My dog barked loud enough to drown out the TV behind me. Dustin's voice wavered as he kept talking, spilling out every feeling he had all at once, his hands clasped like he was pleading for his life. Something in me snapped into place. Fear mixed with the instinct to get out of the situation as fast as possible. I stepped back, closed the door, and locked it. A second later, the pounding started. Heavy, rapid hits against the door. My dog barked non-stop. My heart hammered so hard I thought I could hear it in my ears. The knocks kept coming, faster, harder, shaking the door. I pressed my back against it even though I knew that wouldn't stop anything if he really wanted to push harder. I whispered for my dog to stay back and just kept hoping he would stop. Eventually he did. The silence afterward felt almost unreal. When I finally checked through the peephole, he was gone. But the adrenaline stayed in my system long after he left. That night, after Dustin left my doorstep, I tried to settle back into my evening, but nothing felt normal. My dog paced around the living room, barking at every sound outside. I kept checking the locks every few minutes. I barely slept. Around 10, the texts began. "Dustin, Kara, please talk to me. I'm sorry if I scared you. Dustin, I love you. Dustin, you know we're supposed to be together." I didn't reply. Minutes later, more messages came in, the tone sharper now. "Dustin, why are you ignoring me? Dustin, after everything I said? Dustin, talk to me." Then the calls started, one after another, voicemails too. "Kara, pick up. I know you're awake. Don't do this." I blocked his number. But even after that, I couldn't totally relax. When morning came, the idea of seeing him at work made my stomach turn. I called my manager and asked for time off. He approved it without prying. For the next few days, I stayed home, trying to shake everything off. For a short while, the distance helped. I let myself believe he'd embarrassed himself enough to finally back off. One afternoon, I drove to the park. It was a calm, overcast day, the kind where sound carries a little farther. A few kids played by the playground. A couple walked their dog along the perimeter trail, and someone jogged past us on the outer path. Everything felt quiet in a way I didn't trust, but I tried to ignore that. My dog trotted beside me, sniffing at the grass, pulling a bit on the leash when she caught a scent. I tried to concentrate on her, on keeping my breathing steady, on pretending the last week hadn't happened. We turned a corner on the trail, and I noticed a figure jogging toward us from a distance. At first, he was just a shape, just a person. But the closer he got, the more familiar the movements became, the way his arms swung, the slight tilt of his head, the heavy footfalls that didn't match the easy pace other joggers had. My heart dropped. It was Dustin. He wasn't even dressed like he'd been out jogging. The clothes were all wrong for it. A hoodie, jeans, worn sneakers. He'd come there for me. My dog stiffened beside me. I turned around immediately and started walking the opposite direction, trying not to break into a run too fast. My dog picked up on my tension and stayed tight to my leg. "Kara!" Dustin called out. His voice echoed down the path. "Hey, wait!" I didn't look back. I tightened my grip on the leash and sped up. "Kara, come on, talk to me." My pulse hammered in my ears. I reached the wider part of the trail where it forked toward the parking lot and cut across the grass instead of following the path. My dog stumbled a bit to keep up, confused but alert. I half jogged, half ran, scanning behind me without making it obvious. Dustin picked up speed. By the time I got to my car, I was shaking so hard I dropped the keys the first time I tried to unlock the door. I grabbed them off the pavement with sweaty fingers, opened the back door, and ushered my dog inside. She scrambled in without hesitation, tail down, barking. I slammed my own door shut, hands trembling as I tried to get the key into the ignition. Dustin reached the car and started pounding on the window. "Kara, open the door! We need to talk! Kara!" My dog barked so loud she drowned out half of what he said. I got my seatbelt on with shaking hands, shoved the gear into drive, and jerked out of the parking space faster than I meant to. He kept shouting after me as I sped away. When I got home, I locked the front door, then checked it again. My dog stayed pressed against my leg like she was afraid I'd disappear if she didn't. I tried to breathe normally, but my hands were still shaking. A few minutes later, my phone rang. An unknown number. I shouldn't have answered it, but I did. "You can't escape me, Kara," Dustin said. His voice was calm in a way that made my skin crawl. "We were meant to be together. Don't deny it." I hung up and blocked the number, then immediately started looking up how to change my phone number altogether. That night, just before bed, I went to close my blinds. The street outside was mostly empty, quiet, dark. Then I noticed a car idling across the street with its headlights off. A figure stepped out and moved toward the sidewalk. Even with the darkness, I could tell who it was by the outline alone. I shut the blinds quickly and called 911. I told the operator Dustin was outside my house, and I didn't know if he planned to try coming inside. She told me officers were on their way. When they arrived, Dustin was gone. I felt relieved, but the relief didn't last long, because it finally hit me that he wasn't letting this go on his own. Not now, and maybe not ever. A few days later, I finally went back to work. My manager had moved me to a different shift than Dustin, which eased some of the tension sitting in my chest. I kept telling myself that as long as our schedules didn't overlap, I could get through the day. For the first hour, everything felt normal. I rang up customers, restocked the gum display, wiped down the counter. I started to think maybe I'd made the right decision coming back. Then the door chimed. I glanced up and froze. Dustin walked in. He wasn't in uniform. He wasn't scheduled. He acted like a regular customer, heading straight for the aisles, pretending to browse for snacks. My hands went cold. I forced myself to stay focused on the customers in front of me, scanning items with a steady rhythm. Even though my heart was pounding, I kept my eyes down. But I could feel him moving through the store, aisle to aisle, taking his time. Eventually, he picked up a bag of chips and joined the line. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I just waited until the customers in front of him were done. When he stepped forward, he gave a small smile. "Hey, Kara," he said. "I didn't know you were working different hours now. I kinda miss when we shared the same schedule." I swallowed. I've been taking classes during the day now. I hoped keeping it short would end the conversation, but he didn't back off. As I reached for the scanner, he reached toward my hands like he was going to take them. I pulled mine back without thinking, stepping slightly away from the counter. His face tightened with frustration. "Kara, I don't understand why you don't feel the same way about me. Don't you see how much I love you?" I stepped farther back from the register. He moved toward the counter like he was going to follow. Before he could get any closer, our manager stepped out from the office. "Dustin," he said sharply, "you need to leave her alone, right now. If you don't leave, I'm calling the cops." Dustin looked between us, jaw tight, then turned and walked out without another word. As soon as he was gone, my body dropped out of that rigid adrenaline state. My hands shook. My stomach rolled. I thanked my manager quietly, but the words came out thin. When I got to the break room, the second I sat down, everything hit at once. I burst into tears and couldn't stop. My manager told me to go home early, and I didn't argue. The next week was tense. I only saw Dustin once, outside the gas station at closing. He stood near the lot, waiting. When I left, he started to follow me toward my car, but one of my coworkers saw what was happening and walked with me until I was safely inside. Dustin backed off when he realized I wasn't alone. A few days after that, Dustin stopped showing up for his shifts entirely. My manager finally fired him, not just because he wasn't coming in, but because he kept trying to enter the store whenever I was working. Then my manager pulled me aside for a conversation I wasn't ready for. He told me Dustin had a history, something he hadn't known when the company hired him. At his last job, Dustin had gotten too close to a female coworker. He cornered her in the stockroom and touched her. Later, he sent her pictures she never asked for. The company let him go quietly, hoping the problem would disappear with him. My stomach dropped. Everything Dustin had done, the hovering, the roses, the watching, the showing up at my house, the following, the begging, snapped into place in a way that made me feel sick. I kept thinking about how relentless he'd already been with me, how far he'd pushed, and how much further he might have gone if I hadn't kept pulling away. I quit 2 days later. For a while afterward, I still got occasional calls from hidden numbers. I blocked everyone. A few months later, I moved to another city entirely, a fresh start. I haven't seen or heard from Dustin since, but I still lock the door the moment I get home, and I still check the peephole every single time someone knocks.